Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bob Paolini. I'm the outgoing chair of the Victims' Compensation Board. Um, Welcome to this annual meeting of the Center for Crime Victim Services, um, our third or fourth annual meeting, as I recall. Um, I just want to take a couple of minutes just to tell you about the board, who makes up the board, and how we got here, and then maybe a couple comments about the center itself, and then I'll turn it over to Jen. The Victims' Compensation Board was created by statute in 1990, so we're in our 35th year. The statute the statute provides for five members to be appointed by the governor. Um, Three of those five seats, if you will, are um, two of them are by profession, um, and then one is a designated seat for a victim or survivor, and then there are two other seats. The professions are lawyer, which is the seat that I've filled now for, I think, 23 years, and is about to be taken over by Greg Waples, who is a former U.S. Assistant Attorney General here for the District of Vermont. Greg has been a prosecutor in Vermont since I think 1991, and spent time before that as a prosecutor in New York City from the late 70s until he came to Vermont in 91. He is a new addition to the board. Actually, today's his first meeting. So welcome, Greg. Um, the second professional on the board by statute is a physician. And that seat is held by Dr. Richard Katzman, who's also on our screen. He's been a longtime member of the board. Um, Both sort of the legal perspective and the medical perspective bring interesting um, viewpoints to conversations about the cases that we have to handle. Susan Ide, who's on our screen as SI, is the victim survivor member of our board. Two other members of our board are Susan Carr. Um, we call her Susie to distinguish between Susan and Susie, even though they're both Susans. Um, Susie is a retired victims advocate from Caledonia or Orleans County.
Caledonia.
Caledonia, sorry, I didn't remember that.
That's
Um,
okay.
Alicia Post is a mental health professional. She's also on our screen. She is the fifth board member. Um, so, as I said, we were created in 1990. The Center for Crime Victim Services was created a year or so later, maybe a year or 18 months later. And the legislature put supervision of that office, that function, under the Victims' Compensation Board. So we sort of oversee the workings of the center, um, in that we hire the executive director, who then hires the staff and runs the program. Um, the program, as you know, is really the one unified voice for victims in the state. Um, it was originally started to handle claims for compensation for victims of crime. And I think it's 2004, 3 or 4, that the legislature created the restitution program, and moved the Department of Corrections collection of restitution to the Center for Crime Victim Services. So since 2004, we've been performing that function also. Um, so I just want to say that after being on this board for 23 years, I couldn't be more proud of the work that the center does and the people that who work for the center that actually do that work, many of whom are on this call. Um, I just want to thank them for their efforts. And I know at times the work is difficult, um, but these people are very impressive, and they really have the best interests of crime victims at heart. So I want to thank them for their work. I'm going to miss interacting with you folks on a monthly basis, but I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Bob, and welcome everybody. I'm Jennifer Pullman. I'm the director of the Center for Crime Victim Services, and I certainly, again, want to thank Bob. It's going to be weird because I've known you for over 20 years since you started, and I started back at the center in a different capacity. And yeah, it's going to be weird to not see you around or see you at the State House, but we're really grateful to you for all the time that you have put in and your just your advice and steering us and guiding us. So thank you so much. And that being said, we're also very excited to welcome Greg. No pressure. You don't have to stay here for over 20 years. And so we are very much looking forward to working with you as well. I actually do enjoy the annual meeting very much because for me, it's so great to see so many faces and names in the same space because it reminds us of the community that we share here in Vermont, working together to support victims and survivors, to advocate for their needs and to support each other. And, I think of this work as a calling, and I think most, if not all of us do. And it's extremely rewarding, but is very, very challenging. And helping to those who've experienced trauma to navigate systems that are not about them, are not focused on them. And where, in some cases, they're just a witness or a part of what happened to them is a really daunting task. And but we persevere. We don't take no well, and we fight with all of our heart. And I know that we'll continue to do so, even though this work, as we all know, is very under-resourced, adding an additional layer of stress to the work that we all do. Unfortunately, that's become more so this year than any other year that I've been working in this field. We've been operating or trying to operate like it's business as usual, even though the fear that resources could suddenly be withheld, could go away, is very much in the back of our minds. But we will do this. We will do it together, just like we always do. We will weather this storm. But it's especially during times like these that I'm reminded, and our next speakers really bring this home for me, that there are some things that are really important and some things that are really simple and within all of our capacity. Simply listening, stopping and listening. It's something that we all can do, and that simple act, as you'll see, and I'm sure that many of you have experienced, can be transformational for the people that we work with. And I really hold on to that now more than ever because it actually makes me feel hopeful and not hopeless. So when you listen to Mark Winberg and you listen to Brendan Hannon, I want you to think about the power of listening, the power that we all possess when we do that simple act. I'm grateful for their work, and I'm grateful to have them today to share their words of wisdom and also their successes. So I want to turn it over to Mark and to Brenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name's Mark Wenberg. I'm an independent consultant in restorative justice. I also happen to be living in a construction zone right now. So I'm hopeful that the sounds that are taking place in the kitchen cannot be registered on this meeting. But if it is an issue, please just let me know. I don't know if you just heard something from the background or if it all sounds okay.
It's fine. Sounds fine.
Can't hear anything.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay. Phew. Thank you. It may be just because I am just coming off of a 3-day training down at Vermont Law and Graduate School on circle processes, but I wanted to share a couple of the core assumptions. There are 7 of them all together that are the foundation for the work of restorative justice and the work of circle processes. The first one I want to share is all human beings have gifts and everyone is needed for what they bring. That's one of the core assumptions that we move from when we're working in restorative justice and with circles. So again, all human beings have gifts and everyone is needed for what they bring. The second one is everything we need to make positive change is already here. Just kind of startling in the face of our current circumstances. But again, everything we need to make positive change is already here. So Amber, if you could put on the first slide. So the restorative inquiry, which was 2.5 years long and was funded probably the vast majority of the funding came from the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services. And we could not have done this work without the support of your organization. The restorative inquiry operated from a place of restorative justice, which, as Jennifer just alluded to, is deeply connected to listening. So as part of the initial part of the process, and next slide, Amber, we met every week over the course of the pandemic online with a group of former children from St. Joseph's Orphanage. And our primary role as facilitators of a restorative process was to listen to their experiences and listen to what they needed as a result of the harms that they experienced at the orphanage 60 years ago, 70 years ago, as the case may be. And out of that, we developed and heard a series of requests, which then that became our responsibility as facilitators and as people who are connected to systems that have access to resources and also connected to systems that had some indirect or direct responsibility for the harms that took place at the orphanage at that time. It became our charge to do our best to meet the requests of the participants themselves. So I want to come back to the first principle, which is all human beings have gifts and everyone is needed for what they bring. Could you take us to the next slide, please, Amber? This is a photograph from basically the gathering that we had in 2021. This was the core group of participants in the restorative inquiry, and they represented about half of the folks, maybe a little less than half of the folks who engaged in the inquiry, but this was the core group of folks who helped to guide our work. And one of the people in that group is Brenda Hannon. I want to allow her to introduce herself, but one of the skills that she brought as a gift was the skill of being a spokesperson for a group. And so I want to turn it over to Brenda to talk about her experiences.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Brenda Hannon. Mark calls it one of my gifts. He kept on throwing me under the bus to be the spokesperson for the group, even though I usually like to be in the background. I really do not like to be front and forward. And he could even tell you that about the circle process. I had difficulty with that in that I would not join in the circle. I would always sit outside towards the back. That's a hang up I have from the orphanage. I still have not gotten over that, but I did the best I could with the support that everybody gave me. How I came to be involved in this group is after the BuzzFeed article came out in 2018. It did trigger a strong response from the government agencies as well as from the public. It made me think that now would be the time for me to come forward with my testimony. I saw what had happened to those St. Joseph's Orphanage survivors in the 1990s and how, again, the Catholic Diocese had re-victimized them. I also did not feel at that time the public was really ready to listen. It took me almost 2 weeks to be able to read that article. It was very traumatizing, but it also triggered long buried memories I had where I started having flashes of things that had happened. So I just read and watched many of the reports that were coming out, the different news stories, as well as the information of a criminal investigation going to be starting finally into the orphanage and Vermont Catholic Diocese, asking former orphans to come forward with their stories. Took a lot out of me to finally make that call. It only took 50 plus years for this to be taken seriously by the public and government officials. When the restorative justice inquiry process was being set up, I felt it was safe to come forward and finally stand up so that the Catholic diocese, Catholic charities, and the nuns could no longer suppress our stories. They could no longer call us liars or say our stories were made up. By participating in the restorative justice inquiry and the healing it could bring us, as well as make me understand why I reacted to certain life events, has settled something in me. I felt that we were finally going to be believed, and we were. We may not have achieved restitution from the Catholic diocese, but they did have to publicly come out and acknowledge the sexual, physical, and emotional abuses. I consider that the biggest win. By participating in this process, I found I was a worthy person and was able to contribute to many changes to our society and the lives of children. From being taught we were unworthy, useless individuals, to being believed and accomplishing all the projects and changes our group did, makes me feel proud of myself and helps me to move forward and heal. As you all know, because you were listening to all the different projects we accomplished, we had many bills before the legislature that they passed and made laws on the removal of statute of limitations, release of adoption records and original birth certificates, and release of all our records while in custody. Our fights and inputs to the legislature also helped form the Office of Children Advocacy. And I'm not sure if Amy Brady is still the director of, but we were helpful in that. And the Vermont Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Another big contribution was with DCF, who has made changes in dealing with children in custody to keep better watch over the children, as well as the Children First program that they now promote. But I feel one of the most important messages that came out of our input was, when a child tells an adult something, it is now believed and looked into immediately. No more being told by the abuser, only in the minds of a child. Of course, another of our greatest achievements is the opening of the Children of St. Joseph's Orphanage Memorial Healing Space at Keeslick Park, September 5th. The abuses and suffering we have endured carries through all our lives to this day, but in the end resulted in many good changes put in place for the protection and care of children. No matter how hard it is to confront your situation, find good people to stand with you and help fight for your justice. You never know how strong you can be when you have the support that the Voices of St. Joseph's Orphanage did with the Restorative Justice Inquiry Advisors and Mark Wenberg leading the charge in finding ways around the many obstacles, landmines, and triggers he had to navigate with this group. I was always in the background in our meetings, never one to be noticed, or tried not to be anyway. This is still my comfort zone, but the group needed a spokesperson, and with a lot of support and help to others for the group, I did it. In the end, all the emotional trauma for me was well worth the work I put in, even though it may take me many days to recover after an event. I want to thank you, the Vermont Center for Crime Victims, for all your help and support. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. And now all of you are on this call get a sense of why Brenda is such a good spokesperson. I just want to briefly show a couple images, a few more images from the inquiry itself that reflect the accomplishments that Brenda alluded to. And I want to bring one more point in that related to Brenda's challenges sitting in circle. One of the core principles of restorative justice is we lean towards inclusion. So we created pathways for people to participate at the level that felt right for them. And for some people, that meant just getting a once a month update on what was happening. For some people, that meant sitting on the perimeter of the circle. And for some people, that meant sitting in the circle as active participants. And we always created a space for every voice to be heard. So could you, next slide, please? So the core aspect of this, of the restorative inquiry, and I'm just going to go through this very quickly, is that through the listening that we first did as a group, connecting with each other, sharing experiences and building understanding and trust, the group then identified a series of accomplishments they wanted to have. Our job as facilitators of the process was then to create the capacity for the group to achieve what they wanted. So as an example, the group did a training with current Family Services Division workers called a Listening and Reflection Center, and that was recorded. And that video is now available for FSD to use as a training. Next slide, please. There were some members of the group who wanted to form a writers group. And so we reached out to Carol Adenolfi, a remarkable facilitator of writers groups, and she has worked with the group now since 2020 and published 2 anthologies, the most recent one which came out just about a month ago. So the group has 2 books that they've published. Next slide, please. The group, as Brenda indicated, was instrumental, was basically the driving force behind the removal of statute of limitations for physical abuse. And one of the things we did was we pulled together legislators from Chittenden County to listen again to the voices of St. Joseph's Orphanage. And after that session, one of the senators said he had never heard anything more powerful, and he had never seen legislation move as quickly as it did to repeal that statute of limitation. Next slide, please. We worked with the Vermont Folklife Center to create an traveling oral history exhibition, and that exhibition has traveled across the state, and it includes excerpts of oral histories from everyone who had an oral history recorded, and that really is the centerpiece of the exhibition. Next slide, please. And in part, in recognition of this, the Voices of St. Joseph's Orphanage received the Survivor Activist Award in 2021. I take pause at Brenda's discussion about being a worthy person. I've never met nor worked with a more remarkable group of people than the Voices of St. Joseph's Orphanage. And they have transformed my understanding of what the work of restorative justice is. And I've learned so much from them. And one more slide. And this is from the event at Keeslick Park, the opening event. I really encourage you, if you have the chance, to go out to the memorial. It's quite a moving place. Besides the arch, there are large boulders that have writings from the writers group. And it is a place, it's located very close to where the former orphanage is, and it actually may be moving on to the former orphanage property a few years down the road. So again, thank you to Jennifer, thank you to Amber, thank you to the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services for supporting the work of the Voices of St. Joseph's Orphanage and the restorative inquiry. We could not have done this without you, and Vermont is a different place because of it. So thank you.
Thank you so much to you both. And thank you, Brenda. And I agree, you're an amazing spokesperson and you're just incredible. Honored to have heard from you today.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is there anything further you need from us?
No, if you don't want to stay on a long meeting, you are free to go right now. We totally understand.
You're going to have your regular
Thank you.
meeting now?
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
not going to.
So
Thank you,
much.
Brenda.
Thank you both. I'm not going to subject you to our construction zone, but thank you. And thank you for the good work you do.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good afternoon. My name is Christine Morrison, and I'm the manager of the compensation program. The sexual assault program also works under the umbrella of the compensation program. Prior to 1990, there was absolutely no established statewide resource for victims of crime. For 35 years, the Victims Compensation Program has been and will continue to be a resource to turn to, a program which can alleviate financial stress and help victim survivors access the urgently needed medical and mental health care that they may need as they work on healing. Next slide. In state fiscal year 2025, the Victims Compensation Program received 418 new compensation claims and disbursed $367,681.71 for eligible claims. The Sexual Assault Program received 215 new claims and disbursed $76,837.62 for eligible claims. The Victims Compensation Program maintains a victim-centered and responsive approach to its work with victims. When a crime occurs in Vermont, the Victims Compensation Program provides limited financial assistance to eligible victim survivors of crime who have experienced an uninsured financial loss as a direct result of the crime. Most of our referrals come from the court-based victim advocates throughout the state. They are based in the state's attorney's offices in each county. Each eligible claim has a $10,000 maximum cap for payment of crime-related losses. Eligible crime expenses include, but are not limited to, medical and dental care, mental health counseling, funeral costs, and lost wages. The program rarely covers property loss or property damage. The Victims Compensation Program staff consists of the program manager, 3 full-time claim specialists, 1 part-time sexual assault program specialist, and 1 full-time administrative assistant. Next slide. In state fiscal year 2025, the Victims Compensation Program processed 618 payments to victim survivors of crime. 70.6% of the payments we made were for victim survivors in the top 4 crime types. These consist of homicide, domestic assault, aggravated assault, and simple assault. The compensation program received the highest number of claims from survivors of homicide and survivors of domestic assault. Homicide and domestic assault continue to be 2 of the crime types for which we receive the most applications year after year. This year, the crime type for which we paid the highest amount was homicide. We would like to point out that when somebody dies by homicide in Vermont, the Victims Compensation Program can support the surviving immediate family members as defined by statute. These surviving loved ones each have their own eligible claims and may receive compensation for payment of funeral, burial expenses, travel expenses to the funeral, lost wages for time missed from work due to their traumatic loss, mental health counseling, and more. This year, we received compensation applications which were linked to 14 deceased homicide victims. We received a total of 60 claims from homicide survivors. Next slide. Now, this slide focuses on the top categories for expenses for fiscal year 2025. Our top four categories of expenses equaled 65.73% of the payments that we made. These consisted of medical facility, funeral, rent, relocation, and loss of wages. Next slide. In state fiscal year 2025, the compensation program was able to increase the crime scene cleanup cap from $1,500 to $3,000 per claim. Next slide. The sexual assault program payments for 2025. Victims of sexual assault are eligible if the crime happened in Vermont. The victim does not have to report the crime to law enforcement in order to receive services. The victim survivor usually presents for medical care at an emergency department or other setting to include Planned Parenthood or a student health center to receive services. The sexual assault program offers victim survivors access to trained sexual assault nurse examiners, they're called SANEs, at hospitals in Vermont. These specially trained nurses provide the option of forensic medical exam to victim survivors, testing and treatment for sexually transmitted infections, treatment of injuries, certain follow-up care related to the sexual assault, HIV infection prevention medication, and up to 20 sessions of mental health counseling with a licensed provider of their choice related to their assault. The sexual assault program of the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services considers payment of all out-of-pocket medical expenses related to a sexual assault after the victim survivor's health insurance has been billed. Because insurance is required to be billed, there are specific procedures put into place to protect a victim's confidentiality and safety. The program also covers sexual assault charges when a victim is uninsured or has an out-of-state insurance policy. In state fiscal year 2025, the sexual assault program received 215 new claims and disbursed $76,837.62 on behalf of victim survivors. Next slide. As a resource to victim survivors, the Vermont Victims Compensation Program has been part of a collaboration team to improve the center's website and increase accessibility. In addition, victim survivors can print a PDF of the compensation application translated into 14 languages from the CCVS website. Our website also includes information about eligibility, the type of losses we can consider, a link to our online application, and PDF versions of all of our policies. Our website is shared with victim survivors via our acknowledgement letters, phone conversations, and any of our emails. Next slide. In state fiscal year 2025, the Vermont Victims Compensation Program and the Sexual Assault Program reached out and offered training for allied professionals around the state. Comp staff, in collaboration with the Restitution Unit, met with the new state's attorney victim advocates, the attendees of the Vermont Victims Assistance Academy, and the Department of Corrections Victim Service Specialists. Victims' compensation staff also presented to the Vermont Police Academy during their autumn and spring academies. We showcased the support offered to victim survivors and the important role law enforcement plays in getting that information out to victim survivors. On an annual basis, through the forensic nursing program housed at the Network Against Sexual and Domestic Violence, medical providers are given the opportunity to train to become forensic nurse examiners, also referred to as sexual assault nurse examiners or SANEs. At this annual training, our sexual assault claims specialist provides training to these newly trained specialized providers to ensure that they are well versed in how the sexual assault program at CCVS works, and they learn the process of completing the necessary paperwork and submitting it to the appropriate facilities to ensure that victims of sexual assault do not pay out of pocket for their medical expenses after obtaining an initial sexual assault examination. Compensation staff are aware of how important outreach is, and we are committed to growth. As we develop our team, we have plans to continue and expand opportunities for research to allied professionals and others who support victim survivors. In addition, we will continue presenting to each new class at the Police Academy to ensure that all new officers in Vermont are aware of the resources available to victim survivors and their vital role in sharing that information. Thank you. Next slide.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Pelletier. I'm the manager of the Vermont Restitution Unit, which is part of the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services. The Restitution Unit began operations of July 1st of 2004, making FY 2025 the 21st year of operations. The unit is responsible for collecting, dispersing, enforcing, and verifying court-ordered restitution. Vermont remains the only state in the country that has capitalized a fund that allows the state to advance payment of restitution to eligible individual victims of crime. While not all losses are eligible for an advance payment from the fund, those losses are paid to the victim as the unit collects from the offender. This includes crime-related losses for cash, jewelry, precious metals, and undocumented losses, as well as losses to businesses and government agencies. The restitution unit is funded in part by a 15% surcharge on court fines and fees and traffic tickets, as well as money the staff collects from offenders. The unit is currently made up of 7 staff, myself, 2 victim liaisons who work with the victims to help document their loss and send out payments, and the 4 collection case managers who were responsible for working with and collecting from the offenders. Next slide, please. Last fiscal year, the restitution unit received a total of 1,192 new restitution judgment orders statewide from the courts, with just over a total of 2 million being ordered in restitution on behalf of crime victims in Vermont. Of those orders, 417 were for individual victims of crime, while 775 were for business victims, about a 65-35% split. This is pretty similar to last year as well. Over the last few years, we have definitely noticed an increase in the number of orders that we're receiving for business victims, mostly related to retail theft cases. One thing that we have seen an increase in is the same businesses being hit by the same individual over and over and over again. So that certainly results in more restitution cases. In fiscal year 2025, we noticed an increase as well of a larger number of orders from Essex, Franklin, Orange, Orleans, Rutland, and Wyndham. And FY 25 marks the second year in a row with no orders for individual victims in Grand Isle County. So you can see Grand Isle County is pretty low, with just a couple of orders for the whole fiscal year. But again, unfortunately, over the last 2 years, we have not received a single one for an individual victim of crime in Grand Isle County. Next slide, please. During fiscal year 2025, the restitution unit sent out 3,054 payments to crime victims, totaling about just over $1 million. Of that, the restitution was able to advance 314,000, which is up from 241,000 from last year. The remaining 752,000 was paid to victims as we collect from the offenders. All payments sent to victims are processed by 2 victim liaisons that work with victims to document their loss, determine eligibility for advance payment from the restitution fund, and provide victims an update on their restitution. Next slide, please. Oh, Amber, I don't know why this one is funny on your end. It looks fine when I check it. So I apologize, everyone. This is still looking a little bit funny. In fiscal year 25, the 4 collection case managers made a total of about 32,518 outbound calls and text messages on behalf of crime victims. This is up from 27,890 from last fiscal year. Their efforts brought in about $1 million from crime victims in the state of Vermont. Collection case managers are responsible for holding offenders accountable while also making victims whole financially. The relationship that collection case managers build with those on their caseload is an important one. While their primary job is to collect restitution from offenders, they do so much more. Case managers often walk offenders through how to purchase a money order, give them information on who to call about court fines and fees and traffic tickets. They also give them leads on job openings and provide them with information about programs to help them get their license back. So you can, see there's a quote here that you're not seeing, but it's somebody was having issues with getting their mail, and so the collection case manager walked them through who to call and how to, resolve that issue. So many of the offenders that we do work with that we're trying to collect from don't have a lot of the basic skills that you or I may have. And so sometimes as simple as it is to get a money order, just helping somebody with that, or if they have an issue with their mail, like who to address that to and how to fix that is so important. Next slide, please. So as Christine already mentioned, we do work closely with the compensation program to provide training. So as she has already talked about, we did the state's attorney victim advocate training when there are new advocates in the state's attorney's office, the Victim Assistance Academy. In addition, our staff also works closely with diversion programs. So we have an MOU with diversion where we can disperse and collect on those cases as well. And so we generally do at least one, if not two, trainings a year for their court diversion staff. And as Christine mentioned, we also did a training for the victim service specialists at Department of Corrections. So some additional things we'd like to highlight is that we are proud to say that we collected our collection rate, was about 49.5%. This really shows the dedication of our staff to ensure victims are made whole financially and offenders are held accountable for their outstanding restitution and ensuring that they can do what they can to move beyond the crimes they've committed. This fiscal year, we received a number of large payments, from writ of attachments on estates, some lump sum payment settlement offers that victims have offered, and then just other larger payments that came in. So that's always nice to see those larger payments that we can get out to victims and get their restitution paid that much quicker. We're also excited to see the amount that we're able to advance to crime victims increase by 30% over last year. This ensures that individual crime victims are receiving their restitution in a timely manner. And finally, the state of Vermont recently hired our director of animal welfare. So our Jen, the 2 victim liaisons here in our office, and myself had the opportunity to meet with her. So we're excited to have her on board and kind of see what policies and procedures she can implement here in the state of Vermont to change some animal welfare processes and ensure that more people are being prosecuted for those crimes. So shortly after we met with her, we actually looked at our own policies around animal welfare. And there was a case from a number of years ago where our manager at the time felt that the individual victims who cared for some animals that were seized in an animal cruelty case were not eligible for an advance payment from our fund. Because they weren't the direct victims. So we revisited that case and we made the determination that we did feel that they were in fact eligible for an advance. So From 2016 to now, they finally were able to be advanced from our fund. This picture here is Dolly. So she was one of the ponies that was seized from a case in southern Vermont back in 2016. So her now owners are one of the victims that were able to receive that advance from the fund. And so she sent us a picture of Dolly because we were curious to see how she was doing. So just a nice connection to not only the individuals, but the animals too. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Pullman, who will go over the financial piece.
Again, we don't have Carol here today, and so I'm going to try and present Carol's slides. If you know me and you know Carol, this will be interesting, but it will definitely be understandable because when it comes to finances, I look to Carol. But I'm going to talk a little bit about how the center's funded and then how the funds that we are made available to us to disperse out into the community. We are funded, and the services that we support are funded with a mixture of federal funds, state general funds, and state special funds. Currently, with respect to federal funding, we receive about $6.7 million in federal grant funding. And you'll hear more from one of our grants managers, Megan Kinlock, about some more of the specifics about that. But that is a significant piece that we provide, again, throughout the state. We are mandated in statute to be the liaison for VOCA dollars, but we also administer a number of other federal grants. With respect to general funds, the general fund dollars that we receive are primarily pass-through. That means that we don't take any administrative dollars for providing those grants out into the community. That's about $1.3 million in straight pass-through, and they go to the anti-violence grants for the network, supervised visitation, the child advocacy centers. Other programs receive some general fund dollars. And then there are state special funds. The Center for Crime Victim Services is tasked with administering 3 special funds. One's the Victims Compensation Fund, one is the Restitution Fund, and one is the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund. These funds are not supported with any taxpayer dollars, any general fund dollars. They are strictly supported either through fees and fines on traffic tickets and criminal convictions, or in the case of the DV and SV fund, marriage license fees. So again, no tax dollars, no general fund dollars goes into those special funds. Those are strictly reliant on the fees and fines from the other earlier sources that I mentioned. I do want to say that as most of you are probably aware, the special funds are extremely volatile and have been on the decline for the past decade. And a lot of that is due to change in practice. Law enforcement is not pulling people over anymore in the way that they used to. That has been a significant hit to those funds. Also, just a change in practice in terms of a desire to decriminalize some pieces that previously had brought in a lot of money. Let's say, for example, driving with license suspended used to be a crime, and that was decriminalized by the legislature. So that's these policy shifts and changes, which we agree with, do have impacts in terms of our funds as well. And also the courts are inclined more and more to waive these additional costs on those who've been convicted and try and get them on their way without saddling them with extra financial responsibilities. So, we are reliant on declining sources of funding, and there hasn't been needed investment in a sustainable and kind of long-term investment in victim services. Next slide, please. Again, this is Carol's slide, so I'm just going to quickly review the substance of it. She wanted to cover the Victims of Crime Act. Again, you'll hear about other federal grants from Megan Kinlock, one of our grants managers. But again, VOCA is the largest grant that we receive. Unfortunately, it's also the most volatile. VOCA relies in the same way that our special funds, our state special funds rely on fees and fines. VOCA relies on, that's where VOCA is funded at the federal level. So fees and fines on federal convictions. So it's declined quite a bit, as you can see, over the past 6 years. What has taken place is that in other states, they quickly spent that large increase, that $6.17 million for us, which was a larger, same percentage increase, but a larger amount of money in other states. They had spent that. The center kind of took a rainy day approach and kept funding kind of at the same level it was at, which has proven very important because we have not had to make any cuts. But other states have had to do so because they spent that money and then it wasn't there to sustain what they had built. That being said, programs have been level funded with VOCA dollars for 15 years. So we all know that even though we've been able to level fund programs, that's still a cut because it doesn't account for all of the different increases, cost of living, benefits, healthcare, insurance, all of those different pieces. But we have been able to level fund. Next fiscal year, we are anxious about what that's going to look like because we don't anticipate any significant changes in a positive direction. Next slide. This is just showing the overall breakdown of our funding. The DVSV fund, compensation fund, and restitution fund continue to struggle and operate in the deficit. Legislature has helped the DVSV fund on the past 2 years with a one-time infusion of dollars, but the current system is just not going to be able to sustain what is needed to operate the programs and services that are supported by these 3 special funds. Next slide. And finally, just want to show again with this chart that the different federal, state, and special funds, so you can see the amounts and what is going out into the communities. Again, the federal grants, you can see that there is a small percentage, administrative percentage that we are able to utilize for our operating costs and salaries. State grants are straight pass-through. We do not use any of those for salaries or for operating. Restitution, you see that $710,000 that's going out to victims and survivors, businesses. Compensation, those are payments to victims. And then the salaries and benefits and the personal services and operating, that is all through federal dollars and then some compensation and restitution special funds. No general funds are used to support any of the operating of the center or other pieces we are able to use, or we currently use, again, some special fund dollars from restitution and comp, and then the administrative portion we get from federal grants. So now I will turn it over to Megan Kinlock, who will speak about the grants, the federal grants, other grant making responsibilities, and give you a little bit more insight into what's happening at the federal level.
Thanks, Jen. So I'm Megan Kinlock. I'm one of 2 grants managers here at the Center for Crime Victim Services. The other is Amanda Munsell. We are a mighty team of 2. And I will just walk through some of our updates that are coming out of the federal government that we've been weathering the last few months and look at some of the challenges that we see on the horizon and what we are doing in the meantime. Okay, next slide. So the first order of business that I'd like to point out is the executive order that came out back in July, improving oversight of federal grant making. This order had some unique requirements that have been a little bit challenging for us to overcome in the beginning. So this executive order falls especially on discretionary grant, and this says that we only administer 1 discretionary grant, but as of the end of last week, we now have 2 discretionary grant programs, which is the rural program and our new technology grant program that will help us upgrade some of the victim compensation program. Our other federal grant programs, which are VOCA, STOP, SASP, and FIPSA, are all formula grant programs. So executive orders do not supersede federal and state law. So that's something that we want to always keep at the front of our mind, both here at the center and when we connect with our programs out in the general public. A couple things that were a little bit alarming about this particular executive order was the instructions to update the uniform guidance, which is kind of the governing document for all grants at the federal level, to permit termination for convenience. Essentially, they can cancel a grant at any time for any reason, basing it on the fact that it, quote unquote, no longer advances agency priorities or national interest. Then Amber, can you advance that? The other piece of this is not just asking for the federal government to update the uniform guidance, but it also is instructing all agency heads to look at any existing discretionary awards and look for places to insert that termination of convenience into those awards. So should the uniform guidance not get updated, they are looking at other ways to add in termination for convenience. That can be really challenging in a state like Vermont that relies so heavily on federal funding. I'd say all states rely on federal funding, but as a small state, federal funding really sustains a lot of our state services. So this is something that we have been keeping our eyes on with regards to our current awards and with regards to future discretionary awards that we receive. Amber, if you could go next. Another guidance document that we received was guidance for recipients of federal funding regarding unlawful discrimination. So this came out of the Department of Justice, came directly from the desk of Pamela Bondi. So the examples in the document were focused on higher education initiatives, but can have broader implications. The guidance indicates that it should be reviewed by all entities that receive federal financial assistance. So at first read, it may seem like you can ignore it because it is written about higher education. But if you read further in the document, it says that everyone is subject to this guidance document. We've encouraged organizations that receive federal funds by way of our center to consult with their legal counsel if they have concerns regarding their current practices that stretch beyond what CCVS administers. Because we have to keep in mind that our programs are not just receiving federal funds from CCVS. Many of them are direct recipients, or they may receive federal funds by way of other state agencies as well. So we don't want to be the only center providing guidance to folks on how they should interpret this guidance. Then next. So some folks may have seen in the news that CCVS and the state of Vermont have joined into a lawsuit regarding the VOCA or Victims of Crime Act grant funds. So the latest Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, as they're called on the federal level, included some unallowable uses of funds that felt a little bit alarming in the context of making sure that we have a victim-centered approach to services and making sure that victims and that service providers do not need to be worrying about such issues. The first was impeding enforcement of immigration law as being an unallowable activity. Of course, we read this and interpreted it that we do not impede the enforcement of federal immigration law. However, just to be safe and to make sure that programs were not going to be expecting to need to be answering to immigration law enforcement officers, we decided to join in on this lawsuit, which challenges this unallowable activity as well as the second unallowable activity listed here that says it is unallowable to, quote unquote, unlawfully favor individuals in any race or protected groups, including on a majority or minority, privileged or unprivileged basis within a given area, population, or sector. If you're reading that and hearing that and thinking it sounds like a whole lot of non-specific, wide sweeping remarks, that would be accurate. We have a lot of different programs that are servicing specifically different minority groups. For example, Disability Rights Vermont. We can agree that victims of crime that have disabilities are going to have unique needs that your average victim services organization may be challenged to meet or may need additional resources to meet. Under this law, it could be a little bit questionable whether or not we would be allowed to have Disability Rights Vermont or any of our other population-specific grantees serve a limited group of folks. So if anyone is interested, there are links on this slide, and I'm sure that someone could distribute it to folks after if you're interested in reading any of the news articles that are linked here or the case itself. This did recently, last week, move forward into litigation, and this is being handled through the Attorney General's office. Okay, the next slide. So this slide is a little bit hopeful. We like to see this, which is that from federal fiscal year 24, which is the last fiscal year, to federal fiscal year 25, which is the current fiscal year that we are in, we saw increases across the board for our four main formula grants. So that's our VOCA, STOP, SASP, and FIPSA funds. You'll see that the VOCA fund had a pretty significant jump of close to $1 million. This was unexpected. We were anticipating that we would see a cut in VOCA funds, so it was a pleasant surprise. However, the VOCA funds are our most volatile form of funding that comes into us via federal funds, and that's because it's reliant entirely on deposits into the Crime Victims Fund on the federal level. So if there are large settlements, et cetera, that end up having large deposits into the Crime Victims Fund, that trickles down to larger VOCA awards for states. However, if there are not large deposits into the Crime Victims Fund, that often means a cut in funding, and it's really difficult to anticipate year to year what that might look like. So that is to say, we are grateful for the increase, but we are hesitant to celebrate too hard because we don't know what next year will hold. You can see that the STOP, SASP, and FIPSA awards were a little bit smaller increases. You know, when it got down to the SASP award, it was just a little bit over $1,000. So while those are, yes, increases, we know with the cost of living, we know with insurance rates increasing, et cetera, that those are not going to be enough to really sustain long-term in these programs. Next slide. And for a funding forecast, we say forecast because just like the weather, a forecast can change pretty quickly. This is based on what was put out this spring with the quote unquote big beautiful bill, showing that we should anticipate a 25% cut in the STOP and SAS base allocations for the next federal fiscal year. So that would be starting next year. You can see there is our STOP 25 compared to what we believe the forecast will be for STOP 26, and the same with SASP funding. Vermont did begin this year receiving the 10% Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights bonus on top of our STOP base. So that is because Vermont now has the full Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights in law. We were one caveat shy of getting all of it in there for the previous fiscal year, but as of this fiscal year, we are receiving that bonus. That bonus will last us for 3 more fiscal years after this one, so for a total of 4 fiscal years. So the bonus is nice, but it will not necessarily dig us out of a hole should these funding streams continue to go down. Next. Okay, well, that was the end of my very uplifting presentation, and I'll pass it on to Amber.
Thank you, Megan. Hopefully mine is a little bit more uplifting.
Thank you.
My name is Amber King. I'm the training director here at the center, and I'm going to be obviously talking about training and outreach efforts here. So first, I'm going to talk about the Vermont Victim Assistance Academy. That's a mouthful, so I'm just going to refer to it as the Academy from here on out. The Academy is an introductory educational opportunity designed to improve the quality and the consistency of victim services in Vermont. And this course integrates core concepts and best practices that encourage a victim-centered, multidisciplinary, and collaborative approach to supporting those whose lives have been impacted by crime. And during the 2024-2025 fiscal year, we have 47 victim advocacy professionals and community members who attended the academy. And something that I love is that these people came from nearly 20 different organizations throughout the state, which means we had a very diverse group of learners. So they were learning from the subject matter experts, and then they were also learning from themselves. And lots of great networking takes place when that happens. During this fiscal year, the center also partnered with 25 subject matter experts to deliver the academy. I think obviously it's best when you can learn about a subject from someone that's actually working in the field day in, day out, and they are the experts. So that's one of my favorite parts about the academy. And then we also had 5 different victims and survivors that partnered with the center on this training. And the dates for the 2026 Academy have been secured, and I am going to plan on opening up the registration for the 2026 session later this month. So if you haven't already, just make sure you're subscribed to our listserv emails, and I'll also have it up on our website when those do open up for registration. Next, I'm going to talk about National Crime Victims' Rights Week in 2025. Since 1981, National Crime Victims' Rights Week has challenged the nation to confront and remove barriers to achieving justice for all victims of crime. During this week, we recognize the accomplishments of the victims' rights movement and reflect on how far we've come. And every April, the Office for Victims of Crime leads communities throughout the country in their annual observances of National Crime Victims' Rights Week. In 2025, the national theme for that week was Connecting Kinship and Healing. And this theme was a call to action to recognize that shared humanity should be at the center of supporting all survivors and victims of crime. And kinship is a state of being with survivors that drives vital connections and increases access to services, rights, and healing. And kinship is where victim advocacy begins. So in 2025, we had over 117 people total that took part in that week. We had a lot of additional people show up just for the award ceremony in the afternoon. So I don't have exact numbers on that, but it was a lot of people. For this year, our advanced workshop was Kinship and Connection, Empowering Victims as Thriving Survivors. And we had survivor and national speaker Ashley Bendixson join us for that from Rhode Island, and she was just phenomenal. And then we also had earlier in the week a community listening forum, and it was held in Montpelier this year. And it was the second year of doing this, and it was just amazing. We had 3 Vermont victims and survivors that spoke, and it was moderated by survivor and speaker Anna Nassett. And this event was co-hosted with the Montpelier Community Justice Center this year. And obviously, I hope in future years to continue doing this in different areas throughout Vermont and to continue partnering with different community justice centers. For 2025, each April in honor of National Crime Victims' Rights Week, there's an awards ceremony hosted by the center. And this recognizes individuals who have made a noticeable difference for victims and survivors of crime. And in 2025, this award ceremony was again held in the afternoon after the advanced workshop. And you can see pictured here all the 2025 recipients of the awards. There were also 3 dogs in attendance that we did recognize them. They were obviously with the New England Canine Search and Rescue, but unfortunately they did not make it to this group photo, which makes me sad. But the Survivor Activist Award in 2025 went to Alicia Miles. The Outstanding Advocacy Award went to Daniel Leveic with the Department of Corrections. The Ally Award went to New England Canine Search and Rescue. And the Justice for All Award went to Jeremy Evans, and he's the Assistant Chief of Police with the Brattleboro Police Department. Next, I'm going to quickly talk about the Center for Crime Victim Services Advisory Group. The mission of this group is to join with the center to provide guidance on systemic changes that will benefit other crime victims, contribute to the prevention of crime and violence, and to advance in the healing journey of survivors. The advisors offer feedback to victim-centered programs, training events, public outreach, education, and legislative advocacy. And at the center, we believe that survivors have a critical role to play in Vermont's response to violence and victimization, and their knowledge, guidance, and experience should be at the center of what we do and our work in victim services. And I do want to lift up that we had 6 members in our original group that started back in 2023. And very sadly, one of our members passed away last year, and she was amazing. Not only her advocacy as an advisor, but throughout the community, she did so many things and she is very much missed. But we do have 5 members and they have all been with us since the beginning. We meet once a month and we have virtual meetings, and then we also have a goal of meeting once in person per year. Again, the focus areas include legislative advocacy, community education, prevention, training, focus groups for policy review, accountability programs, and much more. And if just a few recent projects is that they train at the Vermont Victim Assistance Academy. They helped co-plan and they also spoke during National Crime Victims' Rights Week. They provide education to Vermont legislators, and they are participating on the Victim Notification Task Force. And again, much more. I quickly want to shout out the fact that the center has a new website. You might have noticed it. We're at the same URL, and it's much more attractive than the previous one we had. And most importantly, it's a lot easier to navigate. It's a lot more accessible. So if you haven't checked that out yet, make sure to do so. And lastly, I'm just going to really briefly go through the fact that the center in the last fiscal year started the process and got through the strategic planning process. We had a pretty big team. It was, of course, all of the center staff. We met in person several times, and we also met online. We had the Crime Victim Advisory Group that I just mentioned. They also were able to provide feedback on things that the staff was coming up with, and they were also kind of coming up with things on their own to present to the staff. And there were advisors that came to those in-person meetings as well. And then we worked with facilitator Kim Friedman with Rock River Consulting in order to do this project. And she was great in leading this and showing us. It's a very confusing process. So I'm glad that she was there to guide us in that. And the timeline, we really started this process in October of 2024, and we had the final strategic plan approved in June of 2025. Our new vision and mission statement, the vision statement is, we envision a Vermont where the voices of those impacted by crime are elevated and responded to with compassion, fairness, and justice. The mission statement is that CCVS offers support, advocacy, and services for those impacted by crime and works to hold those who have caused harm responsible. Our first overall broad goal is to optimize the center's operational effectiveness. The second one is to increase victims' accessibility to and awareness of CCVS services. And goal number 3 is to promote accountable, trauma-informed, and victim-centered services. And obviously these go much more in depth, and there's like different levels of activities and goals, and I'm going to be nice and not go into all of that with you today, but yeah. Now I'm going to pass it over to the director, Jen.
One last time for me, and I'm going to be brief so we can keep you on time. A lot of my job, a good portion of it, is spent working over at the State House to try and improve laws and policies that impact victims and survivors. The main piece that, and the rest of my team will tell you, I have put my blood, sweat, and tears into is on revamping and expanding victim notification. This problems with the system really came to light as the legislature has been thinking about additional reforms, mostly post-conviction, that would frankly can move the goalposts in terms of sentence finality for victims and survivors. And not this past year, but the year before, I raised the issue that I thought legislators were operating under an assumption that this automated system that we have is sort of the end-all be-all in terms of providing notification to victims. A system that's accessible, trauma-informed, and also that is error-proof and provides options and choice for victims. That is not the case. Let the legislature know, and my undying gratitude always on all things at the State House to Senator Richard Sears, who took those concerns seriously. and started us down the road of looking at victim notification and trying to improve what we have and make significant changes to what we have. This past session, we spent an incredible amount of time in the House talking about those issues, identifying them, and out of that process, a task force was created with real strict timelines to get to work and to come back to the Joint Legislative Justice Oversight Committee in November with a plan. And that has been very time consuming, but really illuminative for all of us who have been involved. It includes 2 survivors, includes the center, the network, the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs, Vermont State Police, Victim Services, and the Department of Corrections. So it's been a really, we've been knee deep in the weeds, but I have real faith that we are going to be coming back to the legislature this coming fiscal year, or this coming legislative session, with a lot of changes put in place and a lot to recommend. One of the pieces that did come out of last session, though, that's a concrete change, was that prior to previously, for a victim survivor whose offender was earning time off of their sentence, upwards of, possibly a week per month off their sentence, the victim had to go onto Vine, the victim notification everyday automated system, to find out what time, if any, their offender had earned off their sentence. We were able to fix that so that the Department of Corrections had the obligation they have to offenders is to actively notify no less than 90 days of any accumulated earned time that's been attained. And now they have that same responsibility for victims and survivors. So no longer, as one survivor coined the term, the system required a savvy victim. No longer are we expecting a savvy victim. The Department of Corrections now has that affirmative obligation. We've continued to focus on the expansion of restorative justice approaches. You heard from Mark and from Brenda how effective those can be to meeting victims where they're at. One of the pieces that's being rolled out is looking at involving restorative practices pre-charge, which is really important because a lot of those cases, the cases that would be eligible, are ones where victims are not even involved whatsoever. I'm talking about what's considered low-level crimes by the criminal justice system, but may not be low-level for the person who was victimized. The restorative process would be giving them more of a voice in that role than the traditional criminal justice piece when you're dealing with a backlog, other external factors that cause those cases to not, I don't want to be swept under the rug, but they're not getting any attention. So the thought was we can avoid going through the traditional process in the same way that we can also create more of an opportunity for voice for victims. And we are involved, as is our advisory council, in looking at all of the materials that are being provided to victims and survivors, as well as providing input into the creation of a victim services manual that would be provided to all of their staff. And then finally, the other piece I wanted to highlight were some improvements to our laws that currently govern sexual assault and other civil protection orders. Sexual assault orders can now be obtained 24/7. They used to only be able to be available during business hours, and now that will change and they'll be available 24/7, just like orders regarding domestic violence. And some changes were made to the civil protection orders as they existed. One is that the court can require that the abuser in a final protection order has to attend programming, domestic violence abuser prevention programming, and they can also order temporary possession of a vehicle to the plaintiff who's seeking the order. And also it clarified that stalking can be achieved through electronic means or through apps. That was kind of a nebulous piece, and what we're finding more and more in Vermont and across the country is that stalkers are being very sophisticated with their utilization of technology in terms of accomplishing that stalking of victims. So those are some of the pieces I wanted to highlight. I don't know if anybody has any questions about any pieces of the presentation or just questions on anything at all. but want to give some time for that.
I think there was a lot of information provided, and I want to thank everybody who presented. It was very informative.
Thank you. I don't see any hands raised, and I know it was a lot of information, but I hope you know, and if you hadn't had a chance to meet some of us, now you have, and I hope you know that we are all here to answer your questions. We're all in this together, and we're gonna get through it together. So just please, pick up the phone, send us an email, if we can ever answer any questions for you, or provide any support. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm going to let Christine close us out with a quote that she found that resonated with her and with us.
Hi, this is by Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and best of luck, Bob.
We'll miss you.
Hi, Bob. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you
I'm
all,
not
guys.
crying, you're crying.
Well, enjoy the last gasp of warm weather, everybody.
Thank you.